Ladies and gentlemen, this is basically the Avengers of podcasting, right? This is like when the shared universe comes together, at least for Rainwater.
This is, Captain America and Tony Stark and Doctor Strange all in the same room. I don't know who's who. I just picked them out of a bag.
That's definitely a trio that is interesting if you put those three in a room together. Like, you got the Cap and the Iron Man thing. Like, that's the stark contrast, no pun intended. But then Doctor Strange is not the third character, the third wheel you would expect to be like the mediator. So that works. That kind of fits, I feel like.
Yeah, I want to welcome on board my co-host for the podcast, Welcome Back Bideman, or as we like to refer to it, WBB, SOCO.
Hey, how's it going?
Or as I often like to refer to the left of me, SOCO.
Yes. Yeah, to the left.
Is that a political reference?
In a way, yes.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah,
I didn't really intend it. I just meant it as like physically to the left of me, but I guess technically SOCO is to the left of me politically.
Well, the only reason I asked that is because I know that it's kind of changed as time went on, but when you guys originally started Welcome Back Biden, it was politically not charged, but there was some undertones to that. I mean, it's right there in the title, so you guys had to have touched upon politics to some extent, right?
Go ahead, SOCO. Why don't you cover that part of the story?
Let me see if I can remember everything. Because now we're over 20 episodes in. Let me see if I can remember.
Well, interesting fact, we started WBB pretty much the exact same week. Giles started at midnight at the Spaghetti Factory.
Yeah, we're at 29 episodes as of this episode, I believe.
Both of these projects have been running like in parallel. It's been real. We'll get into that, but go on, SOCO, as to like the history.
Well, I guess I was the one really interested. Okay, well, I got more involved politically with stuff, and over the past, now it's been 2 years, I would say, and I don't know. I was listening to a lot of leftist podcasters, such as Chapo Trap House, Chapo Trap House.
No, there's was it the other one? I mean, it's basically Chapo Trap House, but like the other one's called Bad Faith or something like that.
Oh, Bad Faith, yeah, with Virgil Texas and Brandon Gray. And also some like Useful Idiots a bit too. And I don't know. I was really kind of, and it all just kind of goes back to just getting more politically involved. And I don't know. I kind of got inspired by those folks, and I talked to Matt just to start something kind of political. And it was, it was kind of started political, but I think as the time went on, Matt was on board because he wanted to start something with podcasting, I think. And I was like, yeah, let's go for this. I thought it would be, I wanted to be cool, like all the other cool podcasters.
That's right.
You should listen to our intro song. Just my pathetic grasp for trying to be cool.
And to get into the actual title itself, I mean, it was basically spur of the moment. In the first episode, I was like, well, because we didn't know what to call the podcast at the time. And I was just like, well, why don't we just call it Welcome Back Biden? Because that week, like, Biden had been basically, like, elected. So, like, that was where that title came from. And over time, we've changed it. We can go into that because something that's curious about this podcast over time, it's turned into like its own fictional storyline. So as part of the podcast, there's a backstory where we are being funded by some secretive tech billionaire or something to that effect by the name of Joseph Bideman, whose picture that I created looks pretty much like just Joe Biden, but with a mustache and glasses. So,
yeah.
Go ahead, SOCO.
Well, no, it was funny. It started off political, and I'll admit it wasn't like always any. I was probably more into following the politics a lot, but as I found over time, I didn't necessarily like, even though we were basically I wouldn't say I necessarily had anything always insightful to say. um, and even though and we still touch upon it a little bit more, but over time, it just didn't feel really natural to really talking about. Anyway, for me, anyways, with Matt and such on it. I mean, we do talk about politics from time to time, but over time, as we started doing the show more, I started actually getting a little. Even now, I haven't even followed the news as much, even closely these days. Over time, I would say I got a little bit more, I wouldn't say disillusioned or anything like that, but it certainly was I wasn't as interested as I was before. That was me personally. And it might be Matt's big reveal of me right now.
No, I mean, for me, it's definitely disillusionment to a certain extent, but also just like, because I think overall, if I had to describe what that podcast is, it's a news podcast, but the news is whatever we've obsessively been like paying attention to over the course of the week. So like right now, it's always going to be about Dogecoin because it started with Dogecoin being.
Oh yeah, and I forgot about that too, because that was really Dogecoin was kind of funny as we kind of start. Let me see if I can remember. Was it? I don't know why we exactly started, but we wanted to talk about. Was it because Matt? Was it because you brought it up, or was it because we just thought it was a funny cryptocurrency? I forgot exactly.
Well, first of all, like one of the things was that, as for me personally, I had always wanted to do some kind of podcast or something where I just like track Dogecoin, because at the time it seemed really funny, and then now there's like hundreds of YouTube investors who are seriously tracking Dogecoin. So now I'm kind of like, okay, well, whatever. But we've made it sort of this traditional thing about the episode is at the end of every episode, I will announce the price of Dogecoin, which is pointless because
it's changed by the time you post.
Yes. It's like by the time it's released, like 3 days have passed. Dogecoin could be up, down. It could be wherever.
Oh, I remember our first episode was going to be like, how do you pronounce? Is it called Dogecoin or Doggy Coin? Because I was calling it Doggy Coin for a while.
Right.
And that was actually going to be our first episode of us debating on discussing whether it was Dogecoin or Doggy Coin, and we were going to vote on it. But then we ended up, I think, what was it? Maybe 5 minutes. We kind of realized, oh wait, it's actually called Dogecoin, and so we did. But it was like, oh well, and we just started. I guess we just started having. I've even forgot what our first episode actually even covered, but it's our. But according to Mr. Joe Bideman, it's his favorite episode, and it's the only episode he actually intensely listened to. So.
It is interesting though. Like we were talking a little bit before we came on the air. So like, do you guys like? I know it's kind of like a topical type of podcast, whereas ours is a little bit more. I don't want to call it pretentious, but we're a little bit more philosophical, just talking about general like instructional type stuff. Whereas you guys are talking about more like current events, news, pop culture, things of that nature. So I'm curious to know, when you guys go into it, do you ever like come in with, like you talked about the Dogecoin thing, but is there ever like a plan? Like, do you guys like go into it like, hey, this week let's talk about this and go into that, or is it just completely organic, free flowing?
We started that way, whereas we were trying to kind of get a bit more of an outline in the beginning, but it was turning to be more cumbersome and not so organic.
Okay.
As I felt over time, anyway. And I want to say Matt felt the same, right, or no?
Yeah, I mean, I think what ultimately happened, because one of the things that happened is we like switched producers, like. Yeah. Like not even midway, like shortly after. Shout out to Colin, by the way, who was awesome, who helped us out in starting it. But and shout out to producer Dave, our current producer.
Yes.
You guys have a producer? What the? Rainwater, why don't I get a producer? Am I the mistress? Am I just like the hotel fuck and then I'm done? That's it? I see how it is. Blocking out. I'm leaving the chat.
Hey, I'm sure producer Dave would love to be in on it. So.
Oh no, I'm way too controlling. I'm sorry. I think I am our producer, right? Is that technically what it is? Because
Yeah,
I handle all like
definitely.
the mechanics and the technical shit. Okay,
Definitely.
that works.
But I would say, yeah, I mean, just to digress a little bit into sort of the different roles that I play between the two podcasts, I definitely say like my role, it's probably the same, quite frankly. In both situations, I kind of throw mischief out there and be the person who's like sometimes, like oftentimes, Jal does come up with a lot of the ideas for the themes of the episodes. And we kind of go back and forth on that, and then in I feel like in WBB it is often like I'll go into the Discord and be like, hey, what if we do this in a future episode? So like right now, something that we're doing is we're now making up sponsors for the podcast that are like, it's like Joseph Bideman has now set up. This was storyline canon that SOCO set up apropos nothing. Joseph Biden has 100 startups, and according to him, a startup is just you hire a computer programmer and go to work. But we're now doing a storyline where we open every podcast with a sponsor that is like some Bideman product. So like last week it was Bideman, which was like beer fortified with vitamins and minerals. I think this week we're going to go for Gun Wallet, but I still have to actually write out what the hell Gun Wallet is.
Which is what I love. It's just so stupid.
That's got to be a breath of fresh air for you, Rainwater, because we're kind of heavy over here when we're talking about our stuff. So that seems like it's a lot more fun.
Well, what it is it's like, because what it is it's contrast, right? Because Midnight in the Spaghetti Factory, we'll talk about all the like really interesting, heavy topics, right? Concerning art, concerning thought, concerning coming up with ideas and creativity. And then WBB's like the playground where I execute a lot of the shit that we talk about in this podcast.
That's
right?
fair.
And so it is fun, but it is also a complete mess, right? Like. And the mess is fun, and I'm curious to see where it goes, which is why I like to do it with SOCO, right? And I'm assuming that's why SOCO likes to do it too. I hope, and it's not just like some annoying, like, you know, oh God, what is Matt gonna come out with this week?
No, I always look forward to it. So, actually I like it. We do get into sometimes. I mean, we do get into deeper stuff as well too. But it's not like we have it planned out. It just happens.
It just happens where like sometimes I will ramble on for like 30 minutes on like why I think blockchain is going to change the world or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, or vice versa. Like SOCO has rambles about like union politics and stuff like that. So it's interesting because it's different from anything that I talk about with like anybody else. You know, whether or not anybody else will find that interesting, who knows?
Well,
like
see, that was my big thing when we started this was because SOCO, I don't know if you know the story of this, but we started the podcast kind of as a joke, kind of like Dogecoin. I think I hit like 300 followers on Twitter, and I just randomly tweeted out, I'm like, so at what Twitter follower account number am I supposed to start a podcast? Just kind of being a troll, acting like, you know, because everybody has a fucking podcast these days. And Rainwater was like 300. I think that's it. 300. You just hit it. Now you have to do it. And I'm like, I'll do it if you do it with me. And I think he was like, wait, are you serious? And I was like, yeah, I'll do it. And immediately the wheels started turning for me because my big thing is I hate the internet's kind of air pollution. It's like so filled with like movie reviews. Everybody's fucking talking about their opinion of a movie, and it's like, all right, I don't care. Like my opinion of the movie, maybe my friends' opinions of the movies, I care. Red letter media, that's about as far as it goes. Everybody else can kiss my ass. I don't give a shit what you thought about Batman Begins versus the Avengers or whatever like that. It just doesn't matter to me. So when it came time for me when I was like coming up with an idea, all right, how do I do a podcast? I'm thinking to myself, I want to do something different. I want to do something that's going to kind of pop, that's not adding to that noise, that maybe I can lean into something that I absolutely know I can continuously talk about. And I'm not just talking about for an episode for an hour. I'm talking about for like months on end. But it also has to be, and here's where I get hypocritical, it has to be vague, but also acute. There has to be like a very broad spectrum of things to talk about, but you also have to be very narrow in what you're talking about. So like, even when we talked about certain things, like we narrowed it down to, okay, we're going to do an episode about dialogue. Well, how do we talk about dialogue for an hour? Well, we got to talk about how it informs character, how it moves plot along, how it does this. You know what I mean? Like certain word choices affect how your audience perceives what's going on, all that kind of shit. And then just kind of get into the weeds about that stuff. And I feel like that maybe there wasn't so many podcasts out there that were doing it. The other thing that was very important to me, because we were doing video podcasts, because the only really way I got into podcasting, like aware of its existence, was Joe Rogan. And the only reason was because I was stumbling through YouTube and I found clips of him. Granted, I am so fucking lazy and tied up these days with work that I stopped doing clips for us. But like, that was a good way to kind of get us off the ground. So I was like, okay, I don't know. I know a lot of, I don't want to call us amateurs, but we're amateur podcasters. We're not paid to do it. Don't do that. And that was something else that I thought, okay, I'll put a little bit of elbow grease into it for a while. I think I did it for like the first 15 or 17 episodes, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And then the last thing that I did was I made sure I shaved and got baby face, because the Lord knows that the entire podcast realm is filled with two bearded guys talking about stuff. And I was like, all right, I got to tweak this slightly. So I'll shave my beard off and let Rainwater keep his. And that was kind of my mentality.
Thank you.
Yeah, I figured as much, you know. Plus, it's summertime and I don't like the itchy face. So I'm curious to know, for like, when you guys go into it, do you go into it not necessarily with that same mindset, but like, how do you guys approach your approach to podcasting? And both of you are welcome to weigh in on this however you want it. But specifically for Rainwater, do you go into it with the insight of, I'm going to act differently or think differently or approach things differently with Welcome Back Biden than I do with Midnight at the Spaghetti Factory? Or is it just Rainwater 24/7, 100%? Like, so both of you feel free to answer that, but I'm just curious to know how you guys approach your I don't want to call it marketing, but your approach to podcasting.
Yeah. I guess I'll go first. And to answer your question, Joe, I mean, part of it is that the difference between the two podcasts for me are the difference between my interactions with two different people. So like, how I respond to somebody is based on what our relationship is like, right? Because like, the relationship between two people is different from person to person. The things you talk about, the things that you relate to, the things that you like, you share as likes, or you have conflict as dislikes, completely different. So like, it can cause different sort of interactions, different kinds of thoughts come up between those conversations. And so I kind of look at it as like, okay, these are two, I mean, it's almost sort of left brain, right brain, the two podcasts for me, where it's like, I can kind of exercise both sides of my brain in different ways and enjoy that duality, for lack of a better word, I guess. But does that actually answer? What was the other part? Did you have another part to that question?
Just how you guys go about like standing out from like the crowd, being, you know,
I don't know,
within yourself. Is that even something you consider, or do you just not care? It doesn't matter either way.
I'm kind of, right now, I'm assuming that all the really particular idiosyncrasies of like WBB are so weird that like, either people will hate it because it's not like everything else, or people will like it because it is so unique and different. I don't know. What do you think about that, SOCO?
Well, I mean, the show, first of all, we're just having a conversation. It's just me and Matt talking, essentially.
Yeah, you guys don't.
To be honest, it's kind of like our phone calls a little bit. I mean, we'll call and just talk about random stuff a little bit. Overall, I mean, I'm more if you're wondering about my approach, I'm just more reactive. I'm just reacting to whatever Matt has come up with storyline wise.
Yeah, SOCO makes it really easy to make stupid jokes because he laughs at everything. So it's like, it's perfect.
and that's fine for me. And what I like so far is just like we're just randomly coming up with stuff, and as of right now, that's fine. There's not really any real structure. It's just us talking like two buds. That's it, honestly. And I think we've just been finding stuff that we like to talk about over time, as I would say. Just because some of the stuff I know Matt and Dave were not really interested in. I could tell. I was like getting into like these little particulars about politics and such, and I was like, they're not that interested, and it's okay. Just finding stuff that we're all interested in is kind of the thing for the show. I don't come in with really anything prepared. I'm just ready to react and just go with the conversation.
Well, some of that stuff feels like you guys are kind of on an undercurrent of looking to, I don't want to say unite people, but like you guys want to be a united front in terms of your approach to your podcast, I assume then, right? So it's kind of, there's like a harmonious type of vibe, I guess what it is. Like, because I wouldn't come into like this particular podcast, this particular episode and be talking about fatherhood. Because I don't know, SOCO, if you're a dad or not. So,
no.
Yeah, so like it's one of those things where it's like, oh, that would make somebody the odd person out. I don't want to do that. Rainwater's had some baby experience. Like, there's some stuff where it's like, oh, we can cross over to that, but I don't know if Rainwater wants to talk about that. So it's like you guys feel like you are kind of searching for kind of like harmony in that, where it's interesting to me because it sounds like that podcast is abstract, whereas ours is more narrative. And it's not, ours isn't necessarily narrative, but it's like we go in with the plan and the structure and the idea that we're tackling, whereas you guys are much more freeform. And here's the thing. Our podcast is like, what the fuck did they call it? They don't call it Fool's Gold. What's the fake gold called? Like when you went to
Pyrite?
Guntown, what is it?
Pyrite?
No, like when you went to like Guntown Mountain as a kid, and they let you like sift through the river, and all of a sudden there's little pieces of gold, and you're like, oh, I found gold. What's that? Is that called Fool's Gold?
I thought so.
Okay. Ours is kind of like Fool's Gold, where it's like, oh, it's shiny, and everybody gets some, and everybody's happy, and every now and then it's like we would be like fucking crazy if we found real gold in that river. Whereas you guys are a little bit more abstract, and maybe you don't always hit it on every cylinder every single episode, but when you do, you've just branched into like the stratosphere. Do you know what I'm saying? Where it's like that abstract versus narrative type thing, where if you find like a new form or a new thing that hits, you'll fucking go to the moon. Sure. Whereas we are a little bit more, I don't want to say consistent, but we're steady. Does that make sense?
Definitely. That's a very good analogy, I would say, because WBB is extremely experimental. I feel like
that's what I was trying to get at.
It's to the point that like I don't know if we keep doing this a year from now. I don't know what it's going to be like a year from now. We might have we might have guests. There might be a radio DJ or something. Who knows?
Well, that actually leads me to my next question that I was going to ask, which was, do you guys have any kind of thoughts about where you want to take it in the future?
SOCO, you take that.
Well, currently, I've actually, and Matt's given us ideas, and I actually really like some of the ideas he shared. The thing is, I've just gotten really, really busy is the problem.
I feel that.
I do a lot of other work, and I feel probably in a few months it'll be calmer at a certain point. I don't know. Matt shared some ideas that I think would be really, really fun. I was thinking of some ideas today too, but that might actually be in conjunction with Matt's ideas. So that aligns with Matt's ideas. Whether it be making more characters, even doing, because Matt's even suggested us doing like YouTube videos essentially. I'm actually, I want to make it more like expand out the creativity more in the future.
Sure. Yeah, I mean the YouTube videos are largely because I'm wanting to capitalize on all of the like current stock mania, so that so that we can try and gain followers through that, to have some kind of like fake Bideman associated trade, investor analysis business or something.
That's true. And you guys only have, well, what happens after Biden's out of office? Whether it's 4 years or 8 years or...
It's not Biden, it's Bideman. He's a totally different person.
But the name of the name of the podcast is Welcome Back Biden or Welcome Back Bideman?
We changed it to Bideman.
Oh, okay. I didn't even notice that. Okay.
Yeah. That was we did that on the sly because we were just like, whatever.
Because I was like, oh, it's a Welcome Back Kotter reference, and he was kind of in that setting before. I get it. It totally makes sense.
Yeah.
But no, that makes sense. So that can go ever long. Do you guys have any hopes for it to be long term? Like, where do you see it going eventually? Because I know for me, for Midnight at the Spaghetti Factory, and I know I threw Rainwater for a loop one day. We were discussing episode topics after we had finished recording, and I had mentioned that one of them was like a series finale type of level thing. And right. I think that threw Rainwater for a loop because I don't think he considered that I fully intend at one point or another that I will probably pull the plug on this. Like, I'm going to be like, okay, we're done. Like, this is the series. We're done talking about it, and I'm walking away. We can do another podcast, but it'll be about something else or something, whatever. Like, I totally intend for us to end the podcast at some point. So, but I'm curious to know for you guys, like, do you guys have like an end game, or are you just going to go until you don't want to do it anymore? Or do you have hopes that it'll grow into a game show? Like, I don't know what, like, where do you guys even, do you even consider to think that far? That's another question.
Can I go, Matt?
Yeah, I guess so.
We actually never talked about an end point. Besides,
neither did we. I just kind of assumed that that's what was going to happen. But go ahead.
I think we're going more. We have a timeline that we talked about before, which is once we hit our year mark, we can make decisions on what we want to do next. There's nothing.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Currently, we have a SoundCloud subscription, and once that is over, we can make a decision if we want to.
That's a good call.
Pay for it some more or not. As of right now, it's just kind of seeing where it goes. To be honest, that's how I see it anyway. I guess, Matt.
Yeah, that's where I am too. Cause like, Joe, you had said something like, "Oh, maybe it could be a game show or whatever." I'm like, "Yeah, it could."
That's fun though.
I'm totally on board for that.
But yeah, sometimes getting onto an adventure, not knowing where you're going, is the adventure. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like trying to discuss, and it goes back to that experimental, abstract observation I made before about you guys. Is that, that's fully allowed. There's no fucking rules. There's no. I mean, you guys do have a producer, but you can pretty much do whatever you want to do, and there's no right or wrong about it.
Yeah, I think of it kind of this way. Actually, I was thinking of Matt's situation, how Matt started as an artist. Essentially, he just started drawing comics, and then over time, he kind of just evolved. I'm guessing that's the same with you, Matt. I mean, I know Zhao as well too. When it comes to movie production, he just started probably recording videos. So, like, what am I getting at is,
you're running for office.
Yes, that's it. No, what I'm getting at is, like with Matt or you, I think you guys over time just start kind of doing it just to see where it goes, or you had fun with the activity as well too, and you just kind of found things that you really, really liked. Matt, whether it be like the things you like to draw or the stories you like to actually talk about or give. Same with you, Zhao, I imagine as well too. I mean, we just I wanted to start a podcast. We started a podcast, and we're just gonna see where it goes. Find the things that we like on the journey, and discard the things we don't like on the journey. If that makes any sense. I'm guessing that's how you both, as like creatives, have gone throughout your life, right? Or,
I mean, for me at least, speaking from a filmmaker standpoint, it's with one notable exception. I seem to have a story to tell in almost every genre imaginable. And then once I've got that story done, I'm done in that genre. And I don't want to, I really, at the moment at least, I'm creatively bankrupt. Like I put all of my eggs in that one basket and it's like, that's it. With the notable exception of horror films where I can just constantly, I can come up with an idea for something that'll work. But in terms of like a kid's movie or a comedy or a rom-com or an action movie, I've got one in the bag and that's about it. And that's the only thing for me in terms of my try it experimental phase. And I'm not saying that once I complete it that I won't come up with another idea, but it's definitely that kind of, it's very similar to how you guys approach the podcast where it's free form. It's like, well, let's just try this and see if I like it. And if I don't, then we'll try something else. And that I think is a great thing that everyone should, and this is getting back to the artistic aspect of it, and artists should take this away. I think artists should be experimenting with fucking everything. And I mean, with the exception of suicide and like homicide and things of that nature that can get you locked up and completely destroy your life, there's very little that...
Or others.
Or others' lives. Yeah, that's too. There's very little that an artist should not be trying at least once just to kind of, you know, get an understanding about it. It's one of the reasons why we're talking about a special episode of them getting me drunk off of cocktails, because I might be able to drink with my allergy test coming up next week, fingers crossed. And everybody, there's so many people in my life that are like, you've gone 35 years without having a drink. Why bother? Like, why do I even do it? And I'm like, because I want to fucking know what it feels like. I want to know what it experienced. Like, everybody's talked about it. People tell me it's terrible, don't do it. People tell me it's the best thing ever. Other people are like, yeah, I just do it in moderation. It's not that big a deal. And I want to know for me, how do I respond to this? How does it change how I approach things? Do I see the world differently? Do I feel better? Can I relax? You know what I mean? There's so many unanswered questions. So I've been living in a world where I can't do that experiment. And now I'm coming up with the possibility that I might. And of course I'm going to take it up on it. It doesn't mean I'm going to do it forever. It doesn't mean I'm going to keep drinking and make it a weekly thing or a daily thing or whatever, or an hourly thing like some people do. But it's got to get tried. And that's what I kind of respect about your guys' podcast, is that if you're just fucking trying things, like I said, when you find something that hits, it's going to hit. That's the beauty of it. You're going to find something that other people won't, that we won't, that me and Rainwater probably won't find on this podcast, going through the motions of talking about art and philosophy and storytelling. Rainwater, you look like you got something to say.
I was just going to say, well, and it ultimately goes, I mean, it goes into what the initial structure that's laid out, right? Because, like, we had in both of these projects, there are definitive structures that were laid out at the very beginning that sort of predefine the paths that the two projects are going to take, right? Like, there are paths that WBB is going to go on that, like, we'll never get to the, like we're not, I don't think we're ever going to talk about, you know, art education or, like, things that are important to creative type people.
Oh, we did talk about literary stuff, didn't we? Or was that me and you?
We did talk. Well, we talked a lot about Ayn Rand. With like a little. I mean, we did review the Sonic the Hedgehog movie, and I tried to convince you that it had some kind of libertarian message, some sort of hidden libertarian message. But
it was a fun movie, still. I enjoyed it.
But you know, it's just like within the context of that particular podcast. I don't think it's not going to hit the same notes. I don't think it's ever going to hit the same notes that like Midnight the Spaghetti Factory will hit, and vice versa, right? Like that, and like I was just saying, it's based on what your blueprints are at the beginning, right? And then that doesn't necessarily, you set that path in stone, but it makes it very difficult if you want to change paths, right? At some point in time. Not that it's impossible at all. I'm just saying from a perspective of like, I guess I'm looking at this from the perspective of like writing a story, right? So like if I started a story out that had where you expected we had certain expectations from what was established at the beginning, like going back to talking about genre, right? You make a horror movie and then it becomes like a silly stoner comedy for like the next 2.5 hours. You might be missing people's expectations on like what it's supposed to be as a horror movie.
But that could work. That's the beauty of some of that stuff.
Yeah, I would be curious to see where a movie like that went. But Soka, I also wanted to, because you have, outside of just the podcast, though, you have some other creative outlets that might be worth kind of talking about in regards to music, right?
Oh, I mean, yeah, I guess.
He said reluctantly.
I've just been so busy. All I do is, the only thing I get out of music nowadays is just really listening to music more so than anything else. I've been trying to play like drums and guitar, even though lately I have not prioritized drums because I just got so busy with other stuff in my life. So I even stopped my lessons recently. So
oh, really?
Yeah, I just could not. I was not prioritizing them at all. But for me, I mean, I always listen to music. Music is always somewhat of has always been an outlet for me. And I'm always trying to, well, for me, I can get into a song, I can loop a song for a long time and then pick up sounds and see if I can try to get ideas from it. So that's how the only thing musically that I've been doing, I guess, creatively. So it's just consuming it, but actually kind of reminds me back in the days of like gaming. Like I don't really play video games that much these days either. Because at one point I had an interest to really want to go into that as an industry.
Yeah.
And so I'd play games a lot of the time to get ideas. Partially I was always playing and observing and getting ideas. But then it kind of like, well, I never went and pursued that over time as I got older. And I just kind of don't really play as much unless I'm playing with friends. Because for me, when it even comes to music, like I'm getting ideas. I get ideas from it when I'm listening, actually, whether it be lyrics. Sometimes I just really love the lyrics, or sometimes I love the melody, or sometimes I just love the structure of the song, the drums and stuff like that. I actually listen to that stuff pretty intensely. So now I don't really create as much, but it's okay. I'm getting ideas at least.
Sure.
That's
absolutely.
That's absolutely the same thing I do. I listen to music with that same mindset, but not that. It's interesting. You're how do I put this? You're putting meat into the meat grinder, and you're eventually going to make a hamburger.
I hope so.
That's kind of how you're describing it. Whereas I put meat into the meat grinder the same way that you do, and I am eventually going to turn it into a table. Does that make it should not make sense? I was about to say does that make sense, but it does not make sense because I listen to music and I listen to exactly the same thing that you talked about, where you're listening to like chord progressions and the lyrics and all that kind of stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, how can I translate this into a film or a character or a theme or a scene, like a set piece or something like that? So I mean, I also do that most of the time when I watch movies. I'm a snobby bitch and I'm just like, I would have done that differently. They missed out. Like they had so much potential in this setup, or this character could have done that. Fuck it, I'm stealing it, and I'm gonna do it that way, and I'm gonna change the name of the character and a little bit about him, and I'm gonna make it my own and do what they should have done. But for music, when I ingest music like that, that's my muse. It's my number one. Like that's how I come up with ideas. So I'm curious to know when you guys are formulating what the episode is going to be about. You said that Rainwater is kind of the guy that takes the steering wheel. Is that the dynamic that you guys have, and you're kind of the color commentary? Is that how it works? I'm trying to break down the differences between us, because I mean, as much as me and Rainwater both get philosophical on this, he's much more the quote unquote straight man in this, and I'm the one who's batshit crazy because he could tell you about the number of ideas that he has shot down politely. He's been so kind of some of the weirdest things that I've come up with that I've wanted to do on the episodes. Like there was going to be an episode, spoiler alert, I'm pretty sure we're not doing it now, where Rainwater and I progressively insulted each other over the opinions that we formed from viewing different ink blots. And the idea that I had was, it was a parody idea of how people can see different things in art and then foolishly make it a personal vendetta against other people who see different things. And I really wanted us to get into it and like get really heated and fucking go at each other. And Rainwater, I could tell he's uncomfortable with that because he doesn't want to. I don't know if he like he's seen digits. There is no line for me. I'll fucking say anything. And at the same time, I know he's a very polite gentleman, and I know he doesn't want to say anything at me. So I doubt we'll ever do that episode. But like, there's been some crazy shit I've come up with, and Rainwater's been like, yeah, let's try and do this topic instead. And I'm just like, all right, cool. So I'm curious to know for your guys' dynamic, it sounds like Rainwater's the one pitching that you go into out into left field or whatever, and you're kind of the guy that's just like, okay, or let's talk about something else. It's like, what kind of dynamic is it?
We've had that before where I've completely changed the subject. But I told him, I was like, I don't feel comfortable with this topic.
There have been a lot of things thrown in the trash heap that I've just been like, hey, we should do this. And then both you and producer Dave are like, no, please. No. Mid-episode even.
No. I still remember, we got into a topic of diversity, and I was like, I don't feel comfortable talking about this right now.
It is weird because, like, when we get into those kinds of topics, because I try not to get into whether it's a social issue or a political issue or anything like that. I try not to make that stuff here. Not to go back to the original topic we started the episode off about politics and stuff. Politics and art are very much in tune with one another. A lot of people use art as a way to express themselves without directly doing it. Like they'll subconsciously embed things within their art to get their point across to people that maybe don't agree with them, or try to just present different points of view and things like that. So it's been kind of tricky for me to try to dodge those landmines, because I'm a guy who grew up, and this is the God's honest truth, I grew up conservative, and then in high school I got really liberal, and then in college it was art college, and everyone's liberal in art college, and I attribute this to me being an artist. I had a contrarian impulse, like a reflex, where it was like, maybe George Bush isn't so bad because everybody says he's bad. I'm going to defend the guy. And like, that was my instinctive reflex, was to give the underdog the benefit of the doubt. And like, I was like completely against everybody else in art school. And then after art school, it became the world of Twitter and the internet and
Right.
politics. And that's where it started going nuts, because I was like, all right, I'm just going to fill my timeline with people who agree with me on things I believe. And I did that. But then those same people that I agreed with, I disagreed with other things about. And I'm like, this is taking a lot of toll on my mental health. I cannot do this. I need to find the other side. So I swapped to the other side, and I filled my timeline with that. And then I'm like, these people are fucking morons. Like, I kind of agree the same thing, but not for the same reasons. And eventually I got to the point where it's like, I just have to shut it all out. And I've become that person that's like, the voting booth has a curtain for no reason, or for a reason.
For a reason, right?
Like, I'm not disputing the fact that social discussion is important in terms of discussing ideas and advancing people, or educating people, or presenting alternative points of view and diversity, all that kinds of stuff. I'm not dismissing that at all. My experience has been, nobody goes into those discussions with the open mindset of, I'm going to allow someone the opportunity to change my point of view. It's always, I have to win this fight no matter fucking what. It becomes that competition thing. And that's a topic we're going to be discussing in an upcoming episode, in terms of turning art into competition, which, spoiler alert, I fucking hate. But it's kind of bled the same way into politics, where it's like nobody's coming into that with a point of view of, I want to bring this person to my side. I want to save this person. I want to educate them. It's more so I have to make this person look like a fucking moron. This person is an idiot. I have to build up. I got to get my audience base to retweet me or say or just to get more likes on my post or followers or whatever. And it's just become so muddy to me that like, again, mental health, boom, boom, boom. It's two hands, the left and the right, punching me in the brain. So I was like, let's try not to go there. So it's been kind of like a dance for me to try to get around those potholes, those landmines, that kind of stuff. So sure. I'm curious for you guys, when you started doing that, did you go in with the mindset of, maybe we're going to disagree on topics? Because I've lost friends, and not because I've shut them out, but they've shut me out because I presented alternative point of view, not alternative facts. I'm curious to know, did you guys have any reservations about that when you were going in? Because obviously there was going to be a hint of politics going on. Did you guys feel like you were both in line with each other, or did you go in knowing that you were going to have disagreements and you were going to approach them civilly? What was the kind of mindset with that? I'm just curious from both of your approaches, not necessarily where you are or if you guys have had it out, on a phone call afterwards or something like that, but was there a reservation on your part to go into certain topics like that? Because, it can get divisive, and I know a lot of us want to stay friends, especially as we get older these days. You lose more and more friends, which is one of the reasons, by the way, I fucking love podcasting, is because I've reconnected with so many awesome friends that I've just lost touch with for one reason or another. But anyway, back to the question. What kind of like reservations did you guys have going into podcasting? Because there's so many things to consider.
Well, I mean, Matt, can I go ahead, Matt?
Yeah, go for it, SOCO.
Okay. Well, first of all, I mean, I have a bunch of friends there are people I'm friends with, and we don't have the same political perspectives at all. And sometimes it can cause tension. Though but I'm usually willing to listen to other people a lot of the time. That might also just be because I'm a humanities background. I was a history major, so you have to always get different perspectives anyway. So I'm used to it, even though, sometimes notes can be hit too. But, I always try to kind of introspect and try to kind of think on things. Me and Matt, there are times where and Matt knows, there are times we don't have necessarily the same perspectives on everything. I know that. There's disagreements here and there. I wasn't thinking that we were ever, but this is the kind of, I think, in my opinion, any friendship. I mean, we're going to have disagreements, but we're still friends. I mean, we can talk things out. It's just like it, and I have friends who I would say one really good friend I can think of right now who's really bright. He's not like bright as looking right.
You're talking about right as in direction, right? Like political swaying?
Like right.
Okay.
Like on the political swing. And, we disagree on things a lot of the times, but we're still friends. Usually, though, where we tend to agree on more of, what's the word? Because we actually, me and some other friends, we're actually in this little group chat. And it's with these two other buddies of mine who actually really hate me right now. I feel. But we actually we're probably more politically aligned actually, than compared to me and my other friend. But the thing is, me and my buddy, we may not agree on things, but we actually are pretty critical. I would say we both have pretty critical thinking skills. I would say, to whereas we can recognize, okay, this is kind of a gray area. Okay, and then this is where he might go right and I might go more left. But our other buddies don't seem to, because there are times where it looks like I'm agreeing with him, and I am, because he actually was like, that's actually pretty right on the spot. And you two are not necessarily, the other guys are not necessarily, using very critical thinking skills.
You want to call them knuckle draggers, don't you? Like the caveman types.
We get into some, and to whereas they end up literally hating me at times, and I'm like, well.
And see, in my experience, that's been the vast majority of people who discuss politics, especially on the internet, where it's just, they have that set agenda of this, and this, and it's nothing else. Like there's no, like you said, the wonderful phrase that I love that you said, critical thinking. Because that's been my number one approach to all things politics the last couple of years. It's just like, this is obvious, this is not, this is sustained, this is fictional, this is fact, this is, you know what I mean? And there's some people who blindly follow a certain political party, and then there's other people who will look into it and say, no, I'm part of this party, and that's wrong. And you know what I mean? And that is what I think we need a lot more of. But I'm just curious. So, like Rainwater, from you, how did you guys go into that knowing, or how did you go into that knowing that there might be disputes? Because let's be fair. SOCO, me and you can probably agree. Rainwater's probably one of the most chill fucking guys in the entire world. Like, you could, like, I'm sure he can get upset. I'm not robbing him of the range of emotion, but Rainwater's just one of those people who is very A, polite, and B, intellectual enough to the point where he can bite his tongue, hold back, and then he'll observe everything you're saying, but then he'll throw an arrow that'll just completely shatter everything that you just fucking said. But he never shoots it with anger. That's the thing about Rainwater that I've noticed, is that he's always coming from like not a middle ground, but a peaceful ground, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my response to that is that I guess in regards to the particular topic of politics, I guess right now, like, because during my time in Portland, I had like a particularly intense moment of like political involvement that for me turned into complete disillusion, and just it didn't go well for me. I'll just keep it short. But even then, like, I was still trying to look at everything as like, okay, when you have two sides of a line, you have two different people trying to solve a problem but using totally different methods, or sometimes you have misperceptions of a problem that turn into conflicts. And so I guess I'm always trying to approach conflicts as like, okay, but what is the actual thing, right? Like you were kind of talking about this earlier, Jao, where it's like there are truths, there are untruths, there are misperceptions, there are all this stuff that goes into political conversation, into national rhetoric, all this other stuff. And it's for me, like, I've taken this stance. I had this stance previous to now. It's just like I've had to do a lot of observation of, like, you know, challenging my own stances, right?
Yeah.
And after challenging it quite enough, I'm come back to the point of, okay, where I was originally was actually pretty good. It worked. So anyway, my point being is, like, I try and retain that it's not ambivalence. It's like emotional distance. It's like I can observe my own emotional. I've had to work a lot to do this, to be able to observe my own emotional response to something, but not to act on it, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's incredibly. It takes a lot of work, and there are times where I know that I'm holding in my emotions to where it's like probably not physically good for me to some extent, which is why I've had to, like, you know, exercise and do all this other stuff to, like, get out the shit, right?
Sure.
Like, because art helps with it, but art is not quite enough. Anyway, point being, I'm really interested in hearing all sides in the same way that I'm interested in experiencing all the different possibilities of life. Because to me, it seems like a form of ignorance to just be like, that side's right. They know what they're talking about. They know everything that they're saying. There's no way they could possibly be wrong about anything. Like, I mean, as an aside, like, getting involved in cryptocurrency and stock markets, you immediately have that perception challenged daily, hourly. Like, any assumption that you have about the value of something, about whether or not something's going to go up or down or whatever, immediately gets challenged. And so I just look at it as like, if all of the facts, or if all of the information of the world is that contingent, I'm not going to make any assumptions yet. I'm going to hear what people have to say. I'm going to hear all the different sides to a story, because there's often more than two sides.
Yeah, it could be five sides. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. Even with all that information, I'll never have all of the information. So I can only ever make an assessment based off of what is all the information that I have in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is, I guess, ultimately, to answer your question, why I go into these conversations with everybody that I meet who I can have that kind of, because there are people who I can't have that rapport with because they look at my chill as like some kind of form of like decadence or privilege or whatever,
Sure.
you know, where it's like, sorry, I'm not going to just blindly join your side. I'm just not. Like,
I've gotten a lot of that in terms of like the COVID stuff. Like, there's been people who are like, you need to be more upset about this. And I'm like, I am allowed to be whatever I want to be about this. Yeah. If I want to be distanced from the particular topic, then I'm going to have my own point of view and I don't have to voice it. Like, that's been a big thing, is that I've had people I've literally seen people say to me on Twitter, which is, you need to get more politically involved in this and that, and how come you don't talk about this and that? And it's like, this is fucking fun for me. I'm here to talk about like horror movies and find out when the next trailer for Spider-Man has dropped. Like, I'm not here to criticize Trump or Biden or whatever. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's nothing that gives me the I don't want to say it doesn't give me the right to do it, because as an American you have, or as a human being, you have a right to speak out about what things you agree with and don't agree with. But at the same time, I do agree that you also have the right that you can remain to yourself, an observational fly on the wall, and just, as you know, go and punch that ballot, and whichever way you've particularly seen it. Just because I'm not engaging in the discussion doesn't mean I'm not engaging in the direction, or that I'm not soaking in the discussion. It's like one of those things, like, I don't have to echo what somebody else has said. They just said it, and I absorbed it, and I either agree with it or I don't agree with it, and I'm going to turn that into a vote.
I also feel like that's tantamount to, and we've talked about this before in this podcast, I feel like it's tantamount to being an artist, because as an artist, your job, if you have a job, it is, if anything, to reflect reality back through the lens that you're experiencing it. And so everybody has a different lens that they experience reality, but I find that the more aspects of reality that I take in, there's a more complete picture of reality that I can give back out to people. Whether they like it or not is their whole decision, right?
Yeah. But, and there's people who will and won't, but you put that perfectly, and I think that's part of the problem. And SOCO, I'm going to give you a chance to talk, because I know it's been like 20 minutes you've been sitting there doing nothing. But as artists, I think we've talked about this before. Our job is to illustrate, not necessarily illustration, but illustrate conflict. And in order to do that, you need to put yourself as a perspective into 2 different characters or 5 different characters on different sides of a point of view for a particular issue, topic, event, whatever it may be. And that reflex carries over into real life for me. You know what I'm saying? Where it's like, I'm writing for this one character who's a hero, but I also have to write for my villain. And if my villain isn't complete, if my antagonist doesn't have a well thought out point of view as to why he's doing this, then that diminishes my hero. It makes my story flat and boring. I don't understand what can happen, what shouldn't happen, my art sucks. It suffers because of it. And if I do my art enough, if I'm writing enough, then it's just that instinctual thing that happens to me. I see something on the news and I'm like, all right, CNN is on right now and they're saying this. Do I swallow that, or do I go to Fox and see what they're saying about it? And then do I go to MSNBC and see what they're saying about it? And then do I go online and see what social media is saying about it? And that's kind of my instinct, is where I'm trying to gauge what everybody is saying, and then I can kind of get a complete picture of what the story is. And then I kind of know my character of me and I know how I relate back to it. So I guess we can wrap up this episode because we're coming up on an hour now. And SOCO, I'll direct this at you since you've been a fly on the wall for the last 10 minutes while me and Rainwater rambled. What advice would you give to somebody starting a podcast?
Oh, just start it. Don't think about it too much. Just do it. That's why when I being too much of a perfectionist isn't always a good idea. Just go for it, and you'll learn. Anyway, I learn as I go. That's how I find it. Anyway, just go ahead and just do it. That's seems to be the best approach anyway.
Yeah, I was going to say, because originally the podcast started was SOCO had the idea of let's make a podcast and it'll be a podcast about making a podcast. And I was like,
oh yeah, I forgot. Yeah, that's right.
And it'd be some sort of, I think, was the idea like it was going to be kind of this like ironic thing of we don't know how to make a podcast. So it's just kind of like us flying by the seat of our pants, trying to like fumble our way through it.
Basically, there's so much of our history that we probably need to write down.
Well, it is documented in podcast form, is it not?
Yeah.
Rainwater, how about you? Especially as the child of two podcasts, what perspective can you pitch out there to anybody who's contemplating starting a podcast, or any advice on how for someone who's already have an existing podcast, how to maybe improve it, things that you've noticed that you've improved in over time?
I guess I will mirror what SOCO's saying, just start somewhere, but at the very least, when you start, write down some things that you really want to talk about. And really the writing down part is just so you can get ideas out of your head. So they're not just sitting there mutating into God knows what, right? The more ideas that you write down, the easier it becomes to sort of parse through what it is that you're reaching towards. And it depends on what your goal is, right? Like if your goal is you want to have a cleaner, more path-oriented project, like you might have to do more blueprinting, right? And so long as you have somewhere to start, you can let it grow, and then you pull the trigger. And it definitely helps to have a lot of friends. That
true.
Helps.
I was gonna say, well, it might be because of me too. I generally like to have a there are some I guess the podcast should align with maybe more of your personality as well too. And what I mean by that, if you're a person who likes to talk to others, enjoy conversation, then maybe make your podcast that way. Or if you're a type of person who just likes to kind of be by themselves and kind of explain topics, then do it that way too. For me, I generally like to listen to conversations when I'm listening to a podcast. That's why I probably like Chapo Trap House a lot.
Right.
Like Useful Idiots and Bad Faith. They at least have 2 or 3 people on there and they're discussing something. I like to hear those dynamics and such. I've tried to listen to other like what's his name, Kyle Kalinske. I think for what's it called, the Secular Report. That's it. Or the Human No, I think it's Secular. I forget it. But anyway.
Yeah, I think he changed it or something.
Yeah, I forget. But like I've heard his commentary. He likes to make commentary, and it's just basically him talking to a camera. And sharing his viewpoints. I don't really find it that enjoyable. He has interesting ideas. Obviously, he shares good ideas, or I say good ideas, but he shares ideas anyways, his ideas, and I'm willing to listen to him, but I don't find it that enjoyable, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Just because I want to hear a conversation between people and just listen to those dynamics. That's how I am anyway. So.
Zhao, do you have any advice yourself?
Well, the one thing that I normally tell people who are inexperienced that are coming on as guests, which me and Rainwater have found out as in the course of doing this particular podcast, at some point the ground is going to fall out of underneath you in the middle of an answer or a rant, and you're going to be thinking in your head. You're going to be speaking. You don't know the words that are coming out of your mouth because your brain is talking to you in the moment, and you're thinking, fuck, what am I talking about? How do I parlay this into a different direction? Shit, what are we talking about again? Where was I going? What was the question? And my advice is, when that happens, ask someone else a question. That's the normal way to get out of that, is to wrap up, because sometimes you don't know how to end your sentence. Yeah. Turn it into a question of some sort and turn it around back on someone else.
It's one of the best bits of advice, because you've given me that advice too, because I like to refer to that particular phenomenon as playing my mind horn, where it's just like, I don't know where this is going. We're just going to keep going until it ends.
It's kind of like how you were talking about, Rainwater, writing things down so that you kind of narrow in on something instead of letting your stream of consciousness take you somewhere. You kind of start honing in on stuff and you get really kind of pointed, and that's what I hope that people are coming to our podcast for. My intention with this particular podcast was not necessarily discussions. I do enjoy the discussions, don't get me wrong. I feel like they definitely help our episodes. But my goal was always to, A, educate myself by interviewing Rainwater, interviewing other people, getting different points of view so that I can kind of level up myself, but also spew out what I've accrued, and not in a braggy boast kind of way, whereas I kind of feel like there's so much like art criticism out there, and a lot of people don't have an educated background in art. And I don't say that as somebody with an art school degree, because I don't really feel like I've gotten much from my art school degree, but my approach has always been, this is going to be my philosophy when I'm ranting about how I approach my art. So maybe when someone else is watching someone else's art, or hopefully my art, they're like, oh, that's what Zhao was talking about. Okay, I understand this better now. Because there are things that I watch. I was just telling somebody in an email earlier. Back in 2006, 2007, I posted online. I worked for a movie review blog website, whatever you want to call it. And I trashed Rob Zombie's Halloween. And I fucking hated it. I was like, this is terrible. It lost all the atmosphere that John Carpenter built. That gave, Michael Myers a backstory, which you don't do, and da-da-da-da-da. And in the last several years, I have come to love that movie so much because I've looked through it through a more critical, elevated, educated eye of, yeah, it's a remake. Why should it try to be like the original? Why shouldn't we be trying to get a different interpretation of that story, or different execution of that moment, or a slightly different perspective on that character or whatever? That's what it doesn't cancel the original Halloween. It's not like they took it out of print. The fucking John Carpenter film is always going to be there. You can always watch it every time you want. But now I can watch Rob Zombies too when I'm in a different mood, when I feel like I want to get a bucket of KFC chicken and be a greasy fucking mess and call my wife a fucking cum dumpster whore. And you know what I mean? Like, that's the movie that I want to watch when I'm in that kind of mood.
Yeah.
Right. And there's that to me was an awakening. It was an artistic awakening, and I felt like that should be presented to people at an earlier age, so that they can kind of make themselves aware, if they're not already, that you can have these kinds of thoughts about art. And it sounds pretentious, and I've been called pretentious before, but this kind of shit saved my life. Like, watching movies saved my life. It's plain and simple as that. And it's because I've dug so deeply into them, and I've watched them a million times and observed how this happened, that happened, and this kind of stuff. And I just want to give that back to other people. So like that would be my biggest thing of advice, is that, yeah, you can talk about your review of Land of the Dead or Army of the Dead, whatever that Zack Snyder movie is or whatever. And yeah, it's fun. It's escapism. Maybe you'll find people who agree with you, and you can feel a little bit more part of a community and find other people who reflect how you observe movies, and you can learn new movies from them and this and that. But I like the idea of creating a podcast that stands above the noise, that maybe gives people a little bit different of a flavor, the umami, if anybody knows what that word means, of podcasts. That sixth flavor. Is it sixth or fifth?
I think it's
sixth.
Oh.
Yeah, see, there you go. It's either the fifth or the sixth. the point being is like there's other stuff out there. So I think if you're going to start a podcast, try and do something different. Try and, even if you're reviewing movies, do it differently. Do it some way that somebody else isn't doing it. But like these guys just said, have fun with it too. Make sure, get started, but make it work. We're coming up on the 110, which is our sweet spot. We seem to always wrap up, not at the perfect hour. We go 10 minutes over because I don't know.
Just that little extra. It's dessert.
It's dessert. The last 10 minutes is dessert. SOCO, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
This has been helpful for me, at least, in maybe realizing that we've been stuck in a little bit of a narrative cycle on our episodes. Maybe we should be a little bit more free-flowing with abstract, experimental with what we're doing. Although,
pull the rug.
I don't know if they want another 3-hour looped episode.
Maybe not go that direction.
Yeah.
We'll see.
But we should definitely have you back on if you ever want to talk about music stuff. We'd love to have you on. I'm sure Rainwater will co-sign that argument.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's not to say. I know I kind of railed against this before. I'm not going to go into a rant, but I'm just going to touch on it real quick. That's not to say if we probably should just dedicate one episode to art and politics, and just rip off that Band-Aid and get everything out there, and not talk about politics in general and like our stances, but in terms of how art affects a national conversation. Do you know what I'm saying? Or like how it can transform people's views or present alternative views and stuff like that. I think that would be a really good topic to talk about and just kind of get into that nitty gritty of how to maybe present political arguments differently. But
I'm 100% into that idea because it is, I mean, as a conversation, now we're going to really go over, but as a conversation, it's like, I feel like it's one of the biggest conversations that's happening in our current moment in time, like at least in regards to culture.
Yeah. Right.
Because there's so much that's being reassessed and so much that's being sort of criticized and looked under a microscope. And this isn't a criticism of that's happening. I'm just like, I'd like to talk about it in a way that's very omnidirectional.
It's not. It's non-political talk.
Exactly.
Non-partisan. Is that the right word, SOCO?
Non-partisan. Yeah, I think non-partisan is the correct word. SOCO will probably know better than either of us.
I guess I'll go with it.
All right. Well, we'll definitely have you back on, and we can discuss that or music or like we tell all of our guests, if you have any kind of artistic thing that you want to kind of wax poetical about, we are here. And even if it's just to educate us on something that you want to talk about, I'm always open to hearing and, like you said, discussing various topics, and I know Rainwater is as well. So that'll wrap us up.
Well, I look forward to it. I look forward to that.
I think a lot of people might be interested in that. I think that's definitely a skill set that an artist needs to have. All right. I think we've gone on. We'll wrap it up. We'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.
Later, everybody.
Bye. Bye, all.